first session. We have Professor Taejong Kim from KDI School of Public Policy and Management, and he will give us a talk. He will give us a talk under the title of A Ballpark Assessment of Efficiency in Social Distancing in the Early Stage of the COVID-19 Pandemic. Professor Kim is a highly respected scholar in Korea, and he's an expert in the area of econometric analysis and experimental evaluation in the field of international development. And he also produced large numbers of papers and reports every year. And he also he's also running a research lab on the experimental evaluation in the developing countries. So please welcome him with a big applause. Okay, Professor Kim, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee, for the very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Hi, everybody. Let me start sharing the screen and start my presentation. So the background article for today's presentation is a collaboration with Professor Taejong Kim of Chungang University. And I'd like to recognize the help I received from Professor Juhan Oh. I sought and received a lot of help from him in the process of the research. And also, he suggested the publication venue for the article. And this paper is now available for downloads at the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. But listening to Professor Oh's earlier presentation in the evening, I realized that there are some implicit logical challenges from his findings to what I am going to say in my presentation now. Okay, so here is the theoretical framework for the assessment of efficiency in social distancing. In a pandemic situation, social distancing affects two different types of costs. One is infection costs, the other is economic costs. Infection costs are the treatment costs for the infected, the value of lives lost, and other consequences. And social distancing is going to decrease infection costs. As social distancing gets strengthened, there will be fewer and fewer cases of infections and fewer deaths. But we have to note that social distancing is going to decrease infection costs at a decreasing rate, because if social distancing is too lax, then the health system of a country may be overwhelmed by the large number of severe cases inundating the facilities, and there will be consequently a lot of deaths. And beyond a certain degree, the death stage will be behind us, and the reduction in infection costs from an incremental strengthening of social distancing will get smaller. On the other hand, economic costs will increase with social distancing, and they will increase at an increasing rate. So with moderate social distancing measures, businesses might experience reductions in customs, but beyond a certain level, then businesses will have to start laying off employees, and eventually businesses will have to consider closing their operations. So in this diagram, economic costs are depicted as increasing at an increasing rate. And if you consider both infection costs and economic costs simultaneously, then we can think about total costs, the sum of the two different types of costs. And because of the curvatures of the components, the total cost curve will be U-shaped. And efficiency in the application of social distancing will be attained when total costs are minimized. And that minimization is going to occur when infection costs are similar to economic costs. In this diagram, we denote that optimal degree of social distancing by the symbol D star. And for maybe easier understanding of this theoretical framework, I can ask you to imagine a situation, okay, a different type of problem of placing pedestrian crossings with traffic lights, okay, along a motorway, okay, and if you place a pedestrian crossing, that's going to have the impact of increasing time wasted by motorists while saving the time wasted by pedestrians, right? So we can think about the optimal number of crossings. And in thinking about that problem, we will have to think about the total amounts of time wasted, both by the motorists and the pedestrians. Okay, and the optimal point will be determined where the time wasted by one group will be similar to the amount of time wasted by the other group, or the parity. So I think I can skip this diagram, and we sought to work on three related objectives in this research project. One was to think about a way to practically operationalize this theoretical framework. And second was to evaluate how successful South Korea, my home country, has been, okay, in achieving efficiency in the short-term management of the social distancing measure. And the third goal was to check internationally how successful the global community has been in achieving efficiency. And here was my conjecture. Okay, so going back to the problem of placing pedestrian crossings, right, there will be diverse voices representing different interests of motorists and pedestrians, okay, coming up to affect the government policy. And if the polity is democratically run, and if the polity is good in integrating diverse political interests of the segments of the population into a social policy, then you would expect, the two different types of wasted time amounts will be managed, to achieve parity. Okay, and I thought similarly in the context of the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, if a country has a effectively functioning political system, then the internal political process should be able to determine the extent of social distancing at a level that harmonizes different interests or different voices coming from different sectors of the economy. And I think I already have given you the gist of my presentation today, and my whole presentation is going to be rather short. Statistically, empirically, this is an embarrassingly simple paper. The main empirical analysis is a simple, one sample t-test for a hypothesis concerning a population mean. I never thought I would be able to publish a paper this simple in methodology. But let me give you the rest of the paper. Okay, so we have to think about operationalizing the two types of costs, infection costs and economic costs. And infection costs are the sum of four components. First and foremost, we have the value of lives lost. And then we have value of labor lost by the infected while they go through treatment. And then there will be costs for medical treatment for the infected. And for those who have recovered from the infection, there will be consequences of suffering due to the phenomenon known as long COVID. Okay? And for practical reasons, for data availability reasons, we propose to approximate infection costs by the value of lives lost, which means we are going to ignore the three last items. And I believe this is a fairly good defensible approximation because value of lives lost are so huge, and they are going to dwarf in relative terms the remaining three items. Okay, and to estimate the value of lives lost during the first year of the pandemic in 2020, we used the concept of the value of a statistical life. Okay, this is a fairly well-established concept in the cost-benefit analysis literature. Okay, and because we propose to do this calculation for many countries internationally, okay, we decided to follow suggestions by Masterman and Viscosi, and the World Bank, I understand, is adopting a similar measure. Okay, so because the value of statistical life, VSL measures are available not for all countries, And the existing estimates are concentrated for a group of high-income countries. So we are following the World Bank practices, suggestions by Masterman and Viscosi, okay, to use the 2015 US value of VSL as the base, okay, and then we use the formula at the bottom of the slide, okay, to estimate the value of lives in different countries. Okay, so in the formula, target refers to US in year 2015, and we have the US 2015 well accepted estimation result of the VSL in the US. And of course, we have the income data for the target country, US in 2015. The only other thing that we need to, two things. We need to estimate the value of statistical lives in a target country, South Korea, China, Germany, and so forth, Nigeria, are per capita income figures for the target countries. Okay, and in the formula we have the elasticity. Okay, it is because the value of a statistical life is a normal good. So the higher your per capita income in your country, the higher your VSL tends to become. Okay, and the authors we are relying on suggest a range of elasticity measures, varying from 1 to 0.95, something like that. Yeah, for different income ranges. And so we use this formula to calculate the VSL in a range of countries. We turn to economic costs, and basically we are estimating economic costs borne by countries due to social distancing by the gap between the actual GDP in 2020 and the counterfactual 2020 GDP that we can predict, assuming, in the absence of COVID-19, the same decadal annual growth rate would have prevailed. Okay, so using that assumption, you can estimate the counterfactual 2020 country GDP, and then we compare that against the actual GDP, and the gap we take to be economic costs imposed on countries by the social distancing measures. Okay, and the picture is a lot murkier here than on the previous slide because you have concerns. This measure is going to both understate and also overstate the true extent of economic costs. On the possible understatement side, we have three important components in economic costs we are ignoring in the calculation. Okay, one is welfare loss due to negligence in the care of other diseases. Yeah, because the health systems are practically monopolized, okay, by the care given to the treatment and control of the COVID-19 pandemic. Patients suffering from other diseases are neglected, okay, and we have a very important welfare loss. due to that negligence. And we recognize there is a loss in psychological well-being, okay, due to imposed loneliness and isolation. And we also know that domestic violence has increased because of the social isolations imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay? And one important element, last element that we are ignoring is, economic costs to be incurred in the recovery process after 2020. So, it's not that the economy is going to be put back into the growth path where it used to be when the pandemic ends. We talk about different scenarios for recoveries, right? On the previous slide, we had to ignore the smaller cost items because of the difficulty in measuring those elements. And here we have a similar problem. Okay, so if you are willing to make assumptions, then it might be possible to do some more things. But there are conceptual and practical difficulties in calculating these values. On the other hand, not all the reduction in GDP may be attributed to social distancing because international trade is a big component in any country's GDP, and we know international trade dropped significantly, in 2020, and that's not to be attributed to domestic social distancing measures. So we have both possibilities of overestimation and underestimation, but we we decided to bite the bullet and plunge ahead. And by the way, these practical simplifications are adopted by a prominent paper in the Journal of Cost-Benefit Analysis. In the very early phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, the authors of that paper were trying to think about total costs, okay, associated with different possible strategies to cope with the pandemic threat. And they were adopting similar measures of simplification, to think about associated costs. So we are alone, okay, in making these simplifications, but obviously in the future, I hope some other people can do a better job. Okay, so we did the calculations for economic costs and infection costs for about 158 countries in the world. But here in this table, we are showing the results for a sample of countries: China, South Korea, Australia, Germany, US, and Belgium. Let's think about South Korea. In year 2020, we lost 917 people to the pandemic. And in South Korea, using the formula I showed you before, the value of a statistical life lost is about $5.5 million. Okay. And by the way, if you compare the VSL figures for China, South Korea, Australia, Germany, US, and Belgium, you see there are fairly large variations, and that is reflecting income differences in these countries. And the next column we have infection costs in million US dollars, and that number for South Korea happens to be about $4.9 billion, about $5 billion. That is the product of the number of deaths due to COVID-19 and the value of statistical life in the country. Okay, and then we are comparing that infection costs estimate against economic costs we suffered. Right, this is again the difference between the actual and the counterfactual GDP of the country. And you see, economic costs we incurred in 2020 were much larger than infection costs. And if you think about the differences in terms of the ratio, A over B, infection costs over economic costs, it's a very small number, meaning economic costs were very large, much larger than infection costs. That means South Korea was not close to the efficient choice, D star. And you have variations in the ratio of infection costs over economic costs. China was even more restrictive in social distancing than South Korea. And you have cases like US and Belgium, where social distancing measures were too lax. And in the sample of countries we are considering in this table, Germany seems to have been quite close to the efficient parity point, close to 1, right? And here we are showing the results for the one sample t-test. And the hypothesis is that the ratio of infection costs over economic costs will be close to 1, will be 1, right? That is, if you assume that we have functioning democracies and in the world, and the functioning democracies are effective in communication and also effective in integrating diverse interests of different population segments, then the ratio of EC and IC over EC should be close to 1. And we very strongly reject that null hypothesis for the whole sample of 158 countries. So it seems the global community as a whole has overreacted with social distancing during the first year of the pandemic. And then we try to look at a subsample of countries. Here we have high-income countries with per capita income over 20,000 US dollars. And for that group, we could not reject the null hypothesis. So the rich countries as a group seem to have been able to strike the balance more closely than the world as a whole. So going back to this chart, right? Where is South Korea? South Korea is on the right-hand side of D star, the D star divide. Because of fairly strong social distancing measures, we were able to keep the number of infections, the number of deaths at a fairly low level. But that policy has imposed very large economic costs, and our results suggest that we could have done better efficiency-wise by maybe by adopting a less restrictive measure. And China was further to the right. Okay? And countries like Belgium and the US were on the left-hand side of the star, and Germany was close to the star. Okay? So you know, in the long run, countries should invest in public health systems. And you know, I recall the presentation by Professor Juan. Okay, he talked about the efficacy of TTIQ measures in containing, you know, the disease and limiting, you know, the infection costs from the disease, right? So you know, test, tracing, isolation, and quarantine. All these components need infrastructure and trained personnel. So you know, by investing in the capacities for more effective TTIQ, countries can reduce both infection costs and economic costs, right? But in the short run, we have to live with what we have, and you know, efficient response in social distancing requires, you know, making a painful trade-off between infection costs and economic costs. Okay, so to repeat what I already told you, Korea, together with the global community at large, seem to have overreacted. But you know, the richer countries as a group seem to have struck the balance more closely than the rest of the world. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim. Thank you. It was very interesting and very nice research. Although Professor Kim showed us a very humble attitude while he was speaking, I think the implication of his studies is quite large to us and as well as policymakers in the government. During the past 2 years, I've been always thinking that the government policy against coronavirus should be decided taking account of the cost, not just the benefit of the quarantine or social distancing policies. So it is a always matter of the trade-off between the restriction of individual freedom versus the safety of the whole society. And I think the cost from the sacrifice of the individual freedom and the economic activities of each individual is no less important or valuable than the value of the whole society. So I guess there is a certain limitation of such as it was not possible to convert all the elements into the monetary units, and was not possible to take account of all the possible factors. But I think that is not the point. But I think the main point is that government policymakers must consider the trade-off between those two values. So I think that delivers very important implications to us. So, so from the audience, anybody has any questions? Feel free to raise your hands or leave your comments or question in the chatting window. Maybe audience from other countries may share experiences from your country. Not oh, Professor O. Okay, Professor O. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. it was really great pleasure to read this article in advance some months ago as and in the form of an initial draft. Then that brilliant idea might really please me. So eventually, congratulations on your publication. Yeah, definitely, as Professor Lee mentioned, and also the missing of the measurement in both sides, economic cost and life cost. That is the actually the skewed from the ratio 1 to both sides. However, this measure is really a good balances between life and then also economic life, so that I'm a medical doctor, but I'm not prioritizing health as a first priority, partly because health is not necessarily goal of life. Health is a means of life for other dimension of life, many other important life events, so that equally important to each other. So in that sense, how can we measure that? And in that sense, this is one of the great measures. So I agree with Professor Kim in terms of different economic cost assumption. If probably the TTIQ economic cost will be very lower than general lockdown economic cost. So that in that sense, if Korea can be decomposed into 4 phases, if data is available, but GDP is only unit is year 1, that is not available for the half-year data basis. However, if we can do that, I expect phase 1, 6 months might be best number of this ratio, close to 1. However, phase 2, the 2024, and even from the summer, too much mobility restriction was applied. Even you may remember that the level of up and then insisting more level from the infectious disease specialist. However, other specialists hold that policy. Eventually, it was in the middle. However, more restrictive than previous 6 months, so that ratio might be aggravated because of that the second half of the year. So that I portray the first phase is the best policy option, but second is not. But last year, 2021, if we call that third phase and fourth phase by 6 months and 6 months, then it will be much more aggravated in this ratio, and then much more aggravated in the last second half. And this year, probably it is much more aggravated. So that in this sense, I strongly agree with your assumptive economic cost perspective. So that I wish this can be portraying the good balance between efficient economic burden to save the lives together. Thank you so much.
Okay, may I respond? Thank you very much, Professor Lee, Professor Oh. Very gracious comments. I think Professor Oh's comment gives me a practical idea to further develop this research. Instead of looking at the annual figures, country by country, I know in South Korea we have quarterly GDP figures available, and if South Korea does that, then I'm sure other countries do that too. But so far I have not been able to find a convenient place where we can download quarterly data, GDP figures for all countries. But definitely we can try to look for a more nuanced development in country efforts to strike the balance, and their failures, how they evolve, the policy responses evolve over time, for South Korea and for internationally. I think that would be a very useful thing. I would be personally interested to find out what we can uncover, through that effort. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Oh and Professor Kim for questions and answers. Based on the both studies from Professor Oh and Professor Kim, I think Korean government is not doing well. So it would be interesting if anybody from foreign countries share their experience, how their government are doing. And give us the subjective evaluation of your own country, your own country's quarantine policy. That would be interesting. Or any other questions are welcome. Professor Kwak, our president of SIDE, do you have any comment? You can
I was
you can
gonna
yeah
say
you can yeah
that we have chatted a while ago about the hidden costs or hidden benefits of all this game. So rationally, there has been a ignorance of data and overreaction, and then huge costs that we, in the end, we have paid. But there must have been some benefits for those decision makers, despite of all those costs and misbehaviors, which is a political gain. So I don't know whether we can quantify this in the economic analysis, those political gain, I guess. But every government and every decision maker have a good reason to conduct the way they have done in the fight against the corona. Even there was an analysis about Donald Trump's reaction or Putin's reaction, and even Bolsonaro's reaction from Brazil, which is entirely not rational or analysis oriented one. So only thing that we can explain all those is politics. So maybe in the future, this is a pretty interesting research agenda by adopting the mixed methodology. So combine those quantitative analysis and also those political decision-making theory that we can combine and have so interesting results we can have. It's very difficult to do it in Korea, but in other countries, especially those populist regimes, those big mouth presidents like Brazil or Peru that we have experienced, that there is a clear, tendency that we can detect. But in Korea, it is hardly known. But we thought the Korean approach has been always grounded and research-oriented, clear, like a trace and internet-based approach. But in the end, there was a fatal mistake there, as we have discussed here. So more agenda and more research topics ahead of us. I think that's what I feel today. So it's a great contribution of both academics, both colleagues. Congratulate Professor Kim.
Thank you very much, Professor Kwak. Do you have any response, Professor Kim?
I have met some public health specialists, who accuse the South Korean government of political motivations, right? In the mismanagement. But I doubt that, because there are many other countries that have erred in a similar way on the right hand side of the diagram, including, for example, New Zealand, right? And it's hard to attribute evil machinations to the very nice prime minister of the country, and I doubt that political motivations, evil motivations, played a role. But during the first year of the pandemic, and I think all countries were panicking in one way or another, and I guess my hope is we have learned our lessons, and if we have to deal with future recurrences of similar pandemics, then we should be able to do better next time. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me speak in the position of other Western countries. If any other person not doing that, then actually the Korea was not really better than optimal or better than good ratio. However, as Professor Kim disclosed, the Western countries, the UK and US, showed the other opposite. So that's not also good. So that they chose actually freedom to move in the later part. Early part they did lockdown, but later part they did almost freedom to move to seek the economic the growth, keeping economic growth by sacrificing the life. However, they didn't achieve best ratio even after deciding that. So that once we change our the Professor Kim's scale from the ratio perspective to absolute value perspective, adding both cost. So adding economic cost and then the life cost, infection cost. Then US and UK might be the 1,000 times of Korea and China and New Zealand probably, while ratio perspective is equal distance from the center, but that absolute perspective, the UK and then US, those European countries may have much more worse result. So that in that sense, Korea was not good enough. However, the other countries was much more worse. So everybody was worse. So that is the position of not the position of the attorney for Korean government, but it can be balanced by that.
But at least we can classify bad, worse, and worst.
Yeah.
But no good ones, no better ones. They're all either bad or worse or worst. But I think Korea is at least bad.
Agree. Yeah, I think the one of the costs that should be included and taking into consideration is an inequality issue, because even if you confine the range of your focus within the business sector, the large global medicine company and global big tech company was a clearly winner, and their worth has been doubled and tripled during the past 2 years. In the meantime, small business owners, they are clearly losers and undergo economic hardship during the pandemic years. And I think the inequality issues has to be treated as another research topic, and I suspect that those inequality issues are somehow connected with the political motivation or political, I don't know. Anyway, so I think that's a big cost that we should consider. And
the countries that I have experienced, I mean, maybe many of the colleagues have experienced the African case as well. And especially those countries without much of a severe like a death rate, for instance, Ethiopia. And I think they did minimum actions, minimum measures, and lowering or minimizing the cost of action. So if you put those countries' data into Professor Kim's analysis, we will be pretty highly cost effective. So they they didn't also, there is not much of evidence. There is a high economic or infection cost, but relatively young population and, well, way more like fatal pandemics already have enough causes for difficulties of death, and internally oriented economy, mostly, especially in the case of Ethiopia. I mean, they are not pretty much dependent on the outside externalities. So I don't see much of a changes in this game. So if you take all those cases into our analysis, it'll be much more interesting to see which country has achieved the maximum level of cost benefits in their fight against the corona. Yeah, just a thought.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions or comment? If not, I think although we have 9 more minutes left, I think we can wrap up today's session here. If Professor Kwok has anything to say as a president of the side for today's session, then we can
not
hear.
many things actually. We are no frills academic association. Yeah, no formalities, no inauguration ceremonies or whatsoever. Just want to appreciate for all the participants and excellent presenters and discussants, interesting academic dialogues we have achieved. We have many more menu to come tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Especially tomorrow, we're gonna discuss about some challenges of monitoring and evaluation. We invite Wolfgang Mayer from Germany. And on Wednesday, we invite 2 South African academics who are specialized in national evaluation system. So we are on the verge of linking the international development and also how the role of international development positively affecting the national evaluation system of those countries. So please stay tuned to the site Zoom tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. That's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, President Kwok, and thank you very much, Professor Oh and Professor Kim, for excellent speech, and all the audiences for coming into the Zoom and staying here and paying attention for entire sessions. And I hope to see you, all of you, tomorrow again. Oh,
can I ask a question?
Okay, yeah. Sure.
I'd like to ask to Mr. O regarding the QR code. You said, and then you mentioned that in the near future, Korean government will delete the QR code system. So can you share about a bit more? How gonna difference with today life?
Did you mean the new way of the police in the future in Korea to utilize the more wise use of QR code and etc. in the
yes
effective quarantines? Okay.
Yes.
That I was hoping to support not truly the current type of QR code, but different type of the QR code can be actually inverse QR code. The QR code can be displayed by the space owner, space manager, such as you can make your own place QR code. Then we have our own very innovative anonymous the tracing the digital tracing app, digital proximity app, so that application can utilize its camera to pick up the QR code in your place. So that similarly, every space owner or manager provide that space QR code in their stores or restaurant or any anything that can be at least contaminated between each other, then someone who want to be safe and also someone who want not to transmit to others if they are infected, then they can utilize voluntarily that approximate app. Then they can use their camera to take a picture of that QR code. That's very easy and very convenient compared to this QR code, current QR code. Current QR code need a lot of focusing, so it takes 1 minute or something, more than 1 minute sometimes. But this camera-based QR code is very quick. It's 1 second or 2 seconds. So that based on that, not obligation, but voluntary utilization of everybody's, someone who want to do that, then they can share their record by anonymous way. If someone is infected, then that information is shared to others based on the cross-check of the space overlapping, the staying overlapping contact, by definition contact. Then if they are noticed as a contact from the infected, then they can do self-quarantine regardless of the government regulation. They can do. If I noticed, then I can reduce my activity to contact other interpersonal activities for some days. And also, I can take a artificial test for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, 3 more days, 3 consecutive days for getting consecutive negative. Then I can resume my social activities. By doing that, I cannot transmit anymore, even though I was infected. Or if I was not infected eventually, and I'm happy, and also other persons also not harmed by my safety actions, so that by that way, digital proximate app can help each other just by the voluntary way. So QR code can be utilized by that way in the near future, hopefully.
Mhm.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you for your question at the last minute. Okay, okay, so now it's really time to wrap up. So thank you everybody for coming here and paying attention, and hope to see you tomorrow. Okay, have a good night.
Thanks a lot, Professor Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.
Tomorrow.
Thank you, President Park. Thank you, everybody. Good night.